Hey nerds, Farmer Jassy here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Friday, August 1st, 2025, and today we are talking about what to plant after garlic, interplanting strategies for the fall, including with cover crops, and it's Feedback Friday, y'all, so let's do it. All right, welcome to August, friends. Here in Kentucky, we are about to be losing over 15 minutes of sunlight every week. So by September, we will have lost an entire hour of sunlight. Then that loss of sunlight per week accelerates in September and October until no one can even remember what sunlight looked like. That happens soon enough, except the people down in Florida enjoying my citrus farm without me, which feels insensitive, to be frank. The weather is going to be weirdly nice this weekend compared to every weekend this summer. We'll probably play and watch some soccer with the kiddos per usual, go racing right here, and just try to enjoy the cool down, which would have admittedly been hot by April standards because it's going to be in the 80s. But anyway, we're going to enjoy it while it's here because August is not exactly known for being cool around here, so it may not last. Oh, and just a heads up that I will officially be at the CFSA conference, the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association conference, in November in South Carolina. So if you happen to be in the area, so will I. Anyway, it is Friday, which means Feedback Friday, where we explore what you all were saying about this week's topics. On Monday, we talked about several things, but comfrey around trees was one of the hot topics, and I liked this from @SC-W, it's just a bunch of letters. Quote, another point about comfrey in orchard, we've had comfrey around all of our fruit trees for about 8 years, about 30 trees, apples, peaches, pears, apricots, plums. The trees are all doing great, all on drip irrigation, but we live in a desert, zone 7, mountain, New Mexico, 4 inches of rain so far this year, and we have learned the added benefits of comfrey around fruit trees. In this climate, it seems like they have exactly the same water needs for thriving, but conveniently, the comfrey shows water stress before the tree does. It acts as an alert for us when an emitter has clogged or another irrigation snafu, and I'm sure by now has saved the lives of a few trees by alerting us in advance, end quote. So yeah, that's nice. That's an interesting little tidbit there. Also, Farmer Mike popped on to ask for your farm shots, which you've been doing a great job of, thank you. And @JohnRosier1986 wrote, quote, one show suggestion would be either to do an interview with Farmer Mike or just give him a segment to tell us more about himself and his farming operation. It would be nice to learn more about the man behind the scenes of the show. Just a suggestion, end quote. Don't worry, you will see more of Mike. They are slowly building their new farm, so we'll let him breathe and get caught up for a minute while they get that done. On Tuesday, we talked about farm profitability and specifically took a question about tomatoes. Several good comments on that topic. @Lamb's Quarters Farm wrote, quote, loved Richard's question. I've had the same thoughts on tomatoes. I think in the equation, in addition to competition, is how much you enjoy growing it and the value to your household. For some reason, I love growing the crops that don't show up on the high profitability lists: melons, potatoes, strawberries, corn, winter squash. They all sell out, and I love growing them, and there's a value to my family who also love them, end quote. For sure, it's important to remember, even though 100% farming is a business, and if you don't treat it like a business, it will fail, but also that it's okay to have parts of your farm that are just for you and what you enjoy growing and what you enjoy eating, and if you can sell a little bit extra, that's fine too. There are other forms of capital than money, and to me, money is arguably the least interesting or lasting of any of them. It's just unfortunately the only one accepted by most mortgage lenders. So you got to find a balance. @Brian Murphy, SV6EI, asked, quote, are there crops that you need to display in your farm booth to draw people into your booth versus other booths drawing the customers? I assume if someone walks into your booth to buy something attractive like tomatoes, they will buy a variety of vegetables, herbs, and fruit, end quote. So yes, and this is a thing. These are called loss leaders. Basically, things that don't exactly cover their costs or not very well, but bring customers in hopes that they will buy other products. In businesses with products with better margins than in farming, I think loss leaders are somewhat of a standard. You see them in grocery stores, you see them in other retail situations. In farming, it's a little tougher to justify because, for instance, you're not selling one item at a lesser amount in hopes that the customer will buy the big ticket item while they are standing there, because there really are very few big ticket, i.e. high profit items in market gardening. So I'm not saying you can't do that with some things or have the occasional interesting item that people are like, ooh, is that food? Like ginger, for instance, that's a good one. People have rarely seen ginger with the plant still attached, and they'll often come chat about it, like, what is that? But the issue there is that the customers don't always buy the weird stuff. They just kind of want to talk to you about it, which crowds the booth, and that's not always a good thing either. So, use loss leaders and bizarre stuff lightly. Also, at Ximono, Ximono, wrote, quote, by growing basil under tomatoes, the basil will pay the rent for the tomatoes, ? Yes, I'm trying to find ways to justify growing greenhouse tomatoes because I love to grow tomatoes. Intercropping will change Liz's equation, end quote. Well, yes, potentially the equation I laid out of charging crops rent for the bed that they're in is maybe much more favorable to interplanting than perhaps equations that only look at the value of a single crop. In other words, if the interplanting brings up the value of that bed, then it can help justify the cost of more labor-intensive crops like that. So long as it doesn't itself add more labor to the lower profit crop. But if you're looking at it on a crop-by-crop basis, it may not really change the math too much because neither of those crops will do significantly better just because they're interplanted necessarily. Anyways, there are many different ways to sort of look at profitability. So each farm has to pick a strategy that makes sense for them. On Wednesday, we talked about storage of fabrics and sandbags, and at David Akerland wrote, quote, sandbag storage. I pile them on a double pallet pyramid style, end quote. Yeah, the pallets, that's a good idea. They can come in handy. That works too. Also, we discussed how much land can one person farm in that episode. I appreciate this from at Songhaven Farm 1747, who wrote, quote, great topics, Jesse. I'm mainly a solo farmer with just under a half acre in production. I do use a lot of weed fabric, and where I want to direct sow crops, we've been doing cardboard with about 8 inches of compost. This helps hold back the perennial weed pressure of Canadian thistle and bindweed. The spring and the fall are the most intense times of year as we need to get a lot of compost into the ground and also clean up beds. So that's when my husband helps out and we bring on extra farm help. For storage fabric, we roll Agribon up and store under a shed roof on shelves, hoping the farm cats help us out. However, with more expensive materials like hail or insect netting or shade cloth, we put that either high in rafters where mice won't get to it or roll and seal it into large contractors' garbage bags. I found that mice like to eat anything with food bits left on it, like dried tomatoes, their favorite. Keep up the good work, end quote. This is a great example of like how, how much somebody can farm just kind of depends on them and their situation and what they use. And like I said, nothing is set in stone with how to farm or in this topic, like how much one person can farm. I recommend starting small and growing outward just so you're, not overwhelming yourself from the get-go, but you will find your balance and your methods for good fabric management as well. Good stuff. Then on Thursday, we discussed northern sea oats at Amy Signetti wrote, quote, northern sea oats is a rampant reseeder. We have it along our wooded property line to keep the neighbor's Canada thistle from encroaching, straight face emoji. Yes, it would provide a lot of biomass, but you would have to time your mowing perfectly to avoid chasmanthium takeover. That should be the name of one of my stories. They go on, depending on how dense the shade is, a sterile cultivator of switchgrass like Shenandoah may work. In my experience, it is more shade tolerant than one might think. Then they added bottlebrush grass or Virginia wild rye, maybe other options. I don't have personal experience with cultivation, but they do grow in shade. We see them growing along forest roads, trails, etc. here in Southwest Pennsylvania. Hope that helps, end quote. Great stuff there. There may be additional sort of shade-tolerant grass options out there. Depending on where you're at, there may be some good local ones. The reseediness of northern sea oats definitely would intimidate me a bit, having it anywhere near the garden, but if you can keep it managed, it may work. All right, awesome engagement as always. You all absolutely never disappoint. Best comment section on YouTube, possibly in the world. And it's been a wonderful week in the comments, so keep it up. Up next, we'll take a quick break, and when we return, what to plant after the garlic comes out, BRB.
Farmer Claire Coleman here from the Winter Growers Podcast. Did you know that I also founded Real Farmer Care, a nonprofit that supports farmer well-being? From my own experiences farming, I knew firsthand that this type of support was missing from ag, so I decided to do something about it. As of today, there are over 500 farmer recipients of a $100 self-care award, with more applying daily. If you'd like to help, each $100 donated supports one new farmer. Visit realfarmercare.com to donate and learn more. Again, that's realfarmercare.com.
If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member John Rozier, who asks, quote, a quick question for the Dailey podcast if it hasn't already been addressed. Most of us are harvesting or have harvested our garlic already. What are crops that we should plant in its place? What crops do we want to avoid? A follow-up would be when we select a spot for planting in the fall, what do we need to be mindful of so that we can get a good harvest for next year? Thanks, end quote. All right, I love this, John. And this is actually quite poignant headed into the fall as much as headed out of the garlic harvest season for fall planting and fall planning, because the decisions that you make now will determine what you can plant afterwards. As for what you can grow after garlic, well, one thing about garlic that I love, it's a really good crop for sort of no-till bed flip. Because if done right, you're pulling this crop out and there's very little there to contend with, and you can basically just put something else back in its place. The one thing I wouldn't do that with, I wouldn't grow after, maybe the only thing I wouldn't grow after garlic is an additional allium. But otherwise, the crop species options there are pretty wide open. Of course, time is going to be your biggest factor, and your region is going to have a lot of say in what you can plant immediately following your garlic, depending on when your garlic comes out and how much of your season is left, in other words. For some of you in like the northern region of North America, you are just now getting your garlic out and you don't have a heck of a lot of a season left. So only fast growing crops like lettuce, beets, radishes, fast cabbages like Napa or maybe arugula, that sort of stuff, that sort of below 55 days to maturity or less stuff is going to be maybe the only real option for you there. We've gotten away with planting our winter squashes immediately after our garlic for many years, but my guess is, depending on the squash, this Kentucky Zone 6B is about as far north as you can really get away with that particular combo. Much further north and you'd be playing a little bit with fire. And by fire, I just mean frost. We have also in our climate been able to plant longer season brassicas after garlic because for us, our garlic is out by early July. So that gives us plenty of time to grow one long season crop or even a couple shorter season crops after the garlic if we so desire or so needed to. So really it just comes down to when is the garlic out and what state is the bed in. That latter point is really crucial. And this is what, where what like you're doing this fall in terms of how you're planting your garlic will play a big role in like what you can plant afterwards. For instance, if that garlic bed is a weedy mess and you are already pushing the season a bit, it's going to be a challenge to get a long season crop in there. For instance, the winter squash. So the amount of mulch you add to the garlic this fall will play a substantial role in making sure that you have a plantable area next summer that isn't, covered in grass and weeds. Or you could do what we've done several times with the winter squash, which I would note that we start in soil blocks about 2 weeks or so before the garlic comes out, just so it's ready to pop right in there in transplants. But anyway, what we've done several times is just pull the garlic out, mow the patch, like just right over top of the mulch, and then remulch it and then plant those squashes. This is where the winter squash really shines because the distance between plants makes it an easier choice to plant into all that mulch that can be kind of, like then say, lettuce, which would take lots of little holes in the mulch. With the winter squash, you just have one every 3 feet. It's not too bad. So in that way, if I was to add an important consideration, it would be that unless you are using compost as your mulching material, which can work with garlic, we've done that before. It can be expensive, but it can work. Then you will have to make sure that the next crop is a reasonable pairing with the mulch that's down. Gosh, honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, there are so many options here. Like you could also just rake the mulch aside after the garlic harvest, tarp that area for a week or two, or just like hand weed it or whatever you need to do. Pull the tarps and sow whatever fall crops that you want to, so long as you have long enough season to do such things. There are like infinite options for what you could do after garlic. Anything that you could do from July on or whenever your garlic comes out. Now, in terms of selecting a good spot for the fall garlic really likes a lot of sun, a well-draining soil, obviously, and decent fertility. So if it comes down to a wetter spot versus a slightly better draining spot, go with the better draining spot. I mean, that goes for most crops, but sometimes you don't get a huge choice in that. Anyway, I also should say that I find it's important to get garlic adapted to your area really well. Like, that's what you should start with. I've told this story before, but some garlic that I got from a friend out in California has done significantly worse here compared to the garlic that we usually grow from, that we originally got from a neighbor many, many years ago, and it's grown well ever since. This is complicated, of course, because you don't always know where the garlic seed came from if you're buying it from a catalog or whatever, but one alternative option for seed garlic is to go to the farmer's market and find the best looking, biggest organic garlic that you can, and buy that to start the patch. I'm not saying you won't score a great garlic getting it out of a seed catalog. You can certainly get less disease susceptibility getting it from a seed catalog. But my experiences have been less than ideal getting, mail order garlic instead of just using something local from somebody who you trust. However, if you do get local seed, especially for those in the West where rust can be a big issue, just inquire if they've had any rust issues or any other disease issues that you don't want to, transfer those to your own crop. That would not be ideal. So perhaps just as important as location, the important factors are the garlic seed you use, the cloves, the mulch layer you apply, and your climate. Anyway, hopefully that was a little bit helpful. We are slowly working our way towards garlic planting season here, so I'm glad this is on your mind in July. It will become important soon. And although I don't think I've tackled this exact question before, as always, Patreon members, don't hesitate to ask a question out of fear it may have been answered before. There's almost always something more to add to any of these topics. So let us know what you plant after garlic, and Patreon members, get your questions in. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, intercropping in the fall. Be right back. Today's episode is brought to you by Farmhand. We know it's peak season, you're busy, but the messages you send now are what drive renewals later. That's why Farmhand is offering free instant access to their farmer-built newsletter builder. No demos, no setup fees, just drop your logo, upload your list, and start sending farm-branded emails that boost sales, engage members, and save you hours each week. Get free access today at farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. All right, so something that has been on my mind headed into this fall is just maximizing the space that we have in production now so as not to have to open up more beds that I don't necessarily want to open up. While at the same time, I don't want to have crops in the way for when I want to get my cover crops in. Moreover, a lot of the crops that will be going in soon on our farm and others, well, they're not exactly like fast growing or the most profitable crops. Broccoli, cauliflowers, Brussels sprouts, that sort of stuff. How does one make the most of these areas? Well, perhaps that's where something like interplanting can come into play. I'm going to give you some examples, and hopefully you can add your own in the comments, with both cash crop additions and cover crop interplantings. So with those longer season crops like broccoli or Brussels, the spacing is such that a quick round of radishes down the middle, or even some smaller head lettuce, can sneak their way in between them. So that's one option. And I don't really mind planting two brassicas like, let's say like radishes and Brussels together or whatever necessarily, so long as the bed is well fertilized. Plus they can share insect netting if that's your thing, which, you know, is helpful to be able to use the insect netting for both crops at the same time. As for a cover crop beneath these sorts of crops, I like crimson clover. You can sow it just over top of these crops after they start to get 5 or so true leaves on them, and then lightly rake them in, or even just semi-heavily water them in. Crimson clover does not need the same level of seed to soil contact that the other grains do, because the seeds are so small they just kind of slip underneath of the soil particles for the most part. So it's a nice option in that spot for sort of broadcasting over top of crops. Though if you plant it too early, it can make the harvesting a little bit tough because that cover crop gets so big so fast. So wait until the plants are a little bit larger.
And the idea of there being that after that cabbage is gone, the crimson clover will take over the bed and keep fertilizing it over the winter, and at which point we will have really awesome cover crop.
Another one I've enjoyed in the past is a thick planting of peas that I cut for pea shoots and then just leave for winter-killed cover crop. And you may be like, bro, that's not exactly an interplant. And you're right. But it's a dual use of the same crop, so I'm kind of saying it counts. I've discussed this one recently, but cut lettuces or head lettuces that are planted later, like late August through late September in our region, about a week after that first cutting of the mixed lettuce, or just before the head lettuce fills out the canopy, you can roll through there with a seeder and get a nice cover crop established to come up after that lettuce is done for the season. So basically, the cover crop is sown between the rows of lettuce in the bed, and when it gets too cold to really produce anything out of that field, at least here in Kentucky, so that would be like by early December, the cover crop will be poking through and take over that whole space to be terminated in the spring, assuming you already have your garden planned for next year where you are planning to put your cover crops. And I'm going to talk next week a little bit more about when to plant cover crops, so yeah, be on the lookout for that. That's a teaser if ever there was one. This really could go for any crops out there in the fall, that just before they take over the bed, you can sow a cover crop underneath just so it kind of takes over when that crop is done. I've sown crimson clover, for instance, underneath of our okra for years. As long as you get good moisture there, it typically germinates pretty well. There are some instances where interplanting doesn't work that well, like with the sweet potatoes. I typically just harvest the bed and then rake it down and then sow the cover crop immediately following every time I harvest a bed, not bothering to try and overseed it or anything like that to get a jump on the cover crop, because you're going to be burying it as you unbury those sweet potatoes. Anyway, hopefully there was an idea or two in there for you. Otherwise, that's it, Friday. Let's go racing Louisville, official NWSL team of no-till market gardeners, as you already know. Look for me on the Jumbotron, because I will probably be dressed as a racing. Not really sure what that is, but we'll get creative with it. I hope everyone has a great weekend, and we will see you back here on Monday. Don't forget, No Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Hold on. I I owe a thanks. Huge shouts to Karen F. Myers for their recent donation. Thank you, Karen. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor this show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at no-tillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear while I get a drink of coffee.
For miles in spring.
Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of August, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Kyle Richardville, Patrick Weaver, Alex and Oliver, Bill King, Chris Yates, Ian at Grindstone Farms, Lauren Banesh. Ooh, that's a fun one to say. Lauren Banesh. And James Morley. Very fun. All right, so here's the thing. You know the story at this point. Pizza Farm has squared off with Burger Farm and vice versa. And mysteriously, even though it's kind of become more playful now, someone has moved the pizza oven across the street, and it wasn't Burger Farm. Anyway, so when Burger Farm and Pizza Farm, the families kind of return from their evening out to move the pizza oven back across the street, an old neighbor comes to help and decides to let them in on a little secret. The secret is that the two farmers who lived there before the Pizza Farm and Burger Farm did in their respective farms absolutely hated each other. They feuded for decades before their kids finally decided to sell those properties and move to the city, as has been the case in rural America for many years, and many good feuds have been lost in this rural exodus. So this old timer says, if I had to venture a guess, I'd say you got a ghost or two on your hands. Either that, the neighbor said, or it's the folks who are opening the barbecue farm down the road. Anyway, thanks you all for listening and or watching and or hanging out with me every day, commenting. You all are awesome. We'll see you on Monday. How about that?